This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time.
You guys, some people love life. I've always been on the fence about the whole thing.
They're dead. It's a little late to be neurotic.
Oh my God!
I love jokes so much.
The sarcasm is the refuge of losers.
It is? Really?
Yep.
If he makes you laugh, then he can say, I killed him.
We might have gone too dark on that series finale.
Is that possible?
There's a 100% chance that we're all going to die.
But no, do not worry. The cancel culture in comedy is alive and well.
Some people thought maybe you went a little too far.
Oh, good Lord.
They're like, don't talk about drugs, don't talk about sex, don't talk about religion.
What do you do, go home?
And I'm like, I have fucking nothing.
Comedians at the moment, we're sort of enemy number one. We're the first people to be cancelled.
You're not really doing your job properly if you're not pushing that line.
You can't be the one who decides why you like something.
But it's all about context.
It's the way.
It is all about context. You know,
it's all about fear.
But in the 70s, it's just like, Joyce, didn't you have a baby? Yeah, 3 months ago. Well, where is he? He's in the other room.
with comedy as well, I think you've got to deal with taboos and contentious issues, and sometimes you deal in irony, and some people don't get that.
Because the idea of comedy, really, is not everybody should be laughing. It should be about 50 people laughing and 50 people horrified.
My job is a hard one. I gotta find what's funny about these dark topics that people are afraid to talk about.
In America, people will get more angry about a thing a comedian says in a joke about a topic than about the topic itself.
Just because you're offended, it doesn't mean you're right.
Dark humour, also known as black humour, black comedy, dark comedy, morbid comedy, or gallows humour, is a particular style of humour that isn't for everyone. The good old Encyclopedia Britannica defines black humour or dark humour as writing that juxtaposes morbid or ghastly elements with comical ones that underscore the senselessness or futility of life. When I say that dark humour isn't for everyone, that's because unlike regular ha-ha jokes, dark jokes typically make light of subjects that most people would consider distressing, serious, or taboo. Things like death, disability, drugs, war, and race, none of which are off limits to the dark comedian. Dark jokes have much of the same characteristics as regular jokes. That is, the build-up, the pivot, and the punchline. So what sets dark humour apart is its no fucks given approach to morbid, gross, or absurd subject matter, the things that most people find uncomfy talking about. And well-written dark comedy can tackle these subjects in a way that finds irony, hypocrisy, or unexpected humour in the grimness of the situation. You might have noticed that I've been using a few different terms to refer to this broad topic. So here's a key for reference. Dark humour and black humour refer to the style of humour that one might possess, such as a comedian or a funeral director. Dark comedy and black comedy are interchangeable terms, typically referring to a subgenre in film and media. A dark joke is a joke that has the same characteristics of a regular joke, but with a dark twist in subject matter. And a black joke is a joke that wasn't written for me.
Black people and Mexicans, we don't give a damn how high gas is. We ain't gonna put but $10 in that motherfucker nowhere. Give me 10 on that Escalade, nigga. Give me 10 on that Escalade.
I don't get it. Additionally, there's morbid comedy, which I guess is just more of the same thing, and gallows humour, which tends to be more about death and dying, originally used by people who are about to get executed. While there's a few different terms here, don't worry too much. All you need to know is that dark or black humour walks a fine line between the comedic and the macabre. If it were a wine, it'd be a full-bellied chuckle, followed by a gross aftertaste of truth. Also worth noting that dark humour often hangs out with these other literary devices: irony, sarcasm, satire, and parody. So where did black humour come from? French surrealist André Breton officially coined the term black humour in 1940 in his book titled Anthologie de la Humour Noir, or Anthology of Black Humour. The book contains excerpts from over 45 writers that fit Breton's definition for black humour. But although he defined the concept, it's obvious he didn't create the style of black humour itself. Instead, he credits its origins to satirical author Jonathan Swift from the 18th century. While coined in 1940, the term only really came into common use in the 1960s, alongside the publication of the aptly titled book Black Humour. Edited by Bruce J. Friedman, black humour is again a collection of literary works by black humorists, such as these 5 white guys. But does that mean that humans didn't have a dark sense of humour until the 18th century? Fuck no. Some of the earliest examples of dark comedy go pretty far back. Ancient Athenian Aristophanes wrote a comedy play titled Lysistrata, where women take over the treasury and withhold sex from their husbands to get them to end the war. Aristophanes also wrote The Birds, which depicts two disgruntled Athenians who convince some birds to create a sky city named Cloud Cuckoo Land, as a critique on Athenian utopianism and the absurdity of human ambition. Nailed it! European cultures are particularly known for their dark sense of humour, including the British, where Aussies get their sense of humour from, Russian, Irish, Jewish, Scandinavian, German, and French. And you can also find dark humour throughout Asia, in Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. So dark humour, it seems, is everywhere that humans are. But why? If you've ever found yourself laughing at a joke and then immediately feeling so guilty that you want to throw up, then you might be like me, wondering why I am the way I am. The most widely accepted theory is that dark humor serves as a coping mechanism. Life can be shit. We all experience trauma, get scared, hurt, and stressed out. Life's so shit sometimes that all you can do is laugh about it. When we're dealing with loss or something so absurdly terrible happens, one way to get through the moment is to distance ourselves from our emotions. Dark jokes help us to take an emotional break from the anxiety or fear of the situation, while still acknowledging what's happening. And amazingly, this distance allows us to cope with and process events better. The coping mechanism theory has a buttload of research, mostly looking at jobs where people must confront crisis and trauma on a daily basis. Professions such as first responders, crime scene investigators, military personnel, journalists, and social workers have all been found to use dark humor. One study of medical students in Pennsylvania found that 98% of students report hearing a resident or attending physician make dark jokes about a patient. And no, they weren't just watching reruns of House on Netflix like I do, because it was the 90s and Hugh Laurie was busy preparing for the release of the Spice Girls movie Spice World or filming Stuart Little. But back to the research. If that statistic makes you feel uncomfortable because now you're wondering what your doctor says about you when you leave the room, let's put that aside for a second and dig a bit deeper into the rabbit hole. See, working with trauma, grief, and death on a daily basis can really mess with a person. It's not just that you might be witnessing tragic events every day, but if you're a paramedic or a firefighter, your decisions could be the difference between whether somebody lives or dies. And that kind of emotional labor, potentially coupled with a fear of being perceived as weak if you ask for a mental health day, means that dark humor among colleagues can be a necessary part of your job. And just because people might use dark humor to cope doesn't mean that they feel great about it. In this study of social workers, while 15% felt that dark humor is vital to releasing tension at work, another 20% said that they have mixed feelings about using it. But more importantly, does it even work? Probably. These guys found that humor is linked to increased hardiness and resiliency when facing adverse life events. This research supports the idea that humor facilitates positive affective states while decreasing negative ones. This study found that participants who use humor to cope are less affected by existential anxiety. This study found that dark humor can act as a buffer and reduce severity of things like burnout and PTSD. And this study found that dark humor helps firefighters to cope with the impact of negative experiences on the job and strengthens the relationships between colleagues. But of course, context is important here. If you're a civilian coming into a room full of ER nurses making jokes about a sick patient, you can't expect your sense of humor to match up. Not because you're a stupid dum-dum, but because you know nothing about being a nurse. Because we all love Freud right now, and because he wrote a lot about humor during his career, here's what old Siggy believed. Freud believed that we repress certain thoughts and feelings that aren't socially acceptable to express to others, like aggression and existential anxiety.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
But a dark joke can help us to let go of these thoughts and feelings in a way that is socially acceptable, thereby building something called psychological resilience. In an article titled Freud's Theory of Humor, writers Christoph and Dalphin reiterate that humor is a healthy defensive maneuver. Quote, the internalized voices of our parents as they encourage us to be brave, to adopt a humorous attitude toward suffering, to buck up and persevere. In Freud's essay titled The Humor, Freud specifically discusses gallows humor, saying, The ego refuses to be distressed by the provocations of reality, to let itself be compelled to suffer. It insists it cannot be affected by the traumas of the external world. It shows, in fact, that such traumas are no more than occasions to gain pleasure. Freud's explanation of humour is often associated with what is called relief theory. This theory suggests that humour provides a way to release psychological tension and energy that is otherwise repressed. Today, relief theory is understood as relief from nervous tension or stress through the physiological act of laughing. In comedy, tension and relief are fundamental dynamics employed for centuries by jesters and playwrights, making the powerful laugh and helping nerds get dates. Tension can be created through awkward or stressful situations, escalating conflicts, absurdity, or taboo subject matter. Dark comedy films typically utilize all of these tension-building techniques, often to extreme degrees, because the relief that the humor provides makes it bearable for the audience to sit through. As long as you actually get audiences to laugh. If you don't, it turns into a form of torture that even North Korea would say is taking it a little too far. One of my favorite dark comedies is Little Miss Sunshine, which does a great job of establishing and building tension, with perfectly timed moments of relief. If you haven't seen it, it's really good, so no spoilers. The film centers around a family where multiple characters are in various states of crisis. This would be the worst way to describe the film if I was trying to sell it, but I'm not. I'm trying not to give away any of the details because I want you to enjoy it. As the story progresses, more absurd and stressful situations are introduced, and we must watch to see how the characters will deal with each one. As an audience member, this film makes me feel some kinds of ways. With each new dark twist, I'm forced to both acknowledge the discomfort I feel due to the dark subject matter, like it's a real things that happen and it makes me uncomfortable to see these characters suffering, but then those well-timed moments of humor let me laugh, release some of that anxiety, and ultimately help me to process what's happening more clearly. I think it's worth clarifying that the relief that is created is not the same as distraction. The joke isn't there to pull you away from the dark theme and hug you until you forget. Its role is to provide a brief opportunity of emotional distancing so that you don't get buried in your emotions and can view the situation for what it is. When we encounter something horrible or something that we don't understand, our first response is to ignore or deflect and not feel the emotions. This is normal, it's protective, but the relief of a dark joke calls us back into the moment and forces us to engage with it. When we laugh, it gives us permission to confront the bad thing head on. I'm sorry, did you want to watch a funny YouTube video? Well, too bad. One of the oldest philosophical theories of why things are funny is called superiority theory. Promoted by philosophers Plato, Aristotle, and Thomas Hobbes, superiority theory asserts that dark humor can make us feel superior to others, or even superior over our own vulnerabilities and fears by finding ways to laugh at them. I'm going to use a possibly unorthodox example and look at the comedic career of Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler is best known for playing Adam Sandler in every 1990s comedy film. The Sandman represents the everyman, the lovable goofball who shows his emotions and isn't afraid to be himself. Embodying the true essence of the comedian, Adam Sandler has convinced us all that he's one of us.
Another said he's no longer a movie star, and another one called you a man-child.
I hear that. Yeah, that makes some sense.
Adam Sandler's films, particularly the ones from the 90s, typically follow the same format. Lovable goofball finds himself in an absurd situation of some kind. He must do something to get something. There's a romantic interest who is drawn to his childlike demeanor. There's a side character that has some form of disability or represents a social taboo. There's a bad guy or guys that embody socially unacceptable traits like greed, gluttony, and cruelty. And Adam, when faced with adversity and situations where he must make a moral choice, always does the right thing, defeats the bullies, and gets the girl. Simple, right? A lot of the funnies in Adam Sandler comedies come from the foibles, follies, and misfortunes of the characters. And of course, as audiences, we're always waiting for that delicious feeling of superiority when the bad guy gets what was coming to him. Another interpretation of superiority theory is related to how we might feel superior to our faults and weaknesses when we find ways to laugh at them. An example of this can be seen in the comedy of Maria Bamford. If you haven't watched Lady Dynamite yet but enjoy absurdist, self-deprecating humor, then please go and enjoy it on Netflix. Maria Bamford is best known for her TV show and stand-up comedy, where she turns her own life, including her experiences with bipolar II disorder, into comedy, thereby giving the audience an opportunity to view the world through a hilarious, new, and destigmatized perspective on mental illness. Now this section has gone on pretty long, so I'll finish by quickly mentioning incongruity theory, which is the prevailing explanation of humour today, supported by philosophers such as Immanuel Kant and Soren Kierkegaard. Incongruity theory suggests that humour arises when there is a deviation from what is expected. We anticipate one outcome. It's the incongruity and absurdity of the situation that is thought to trigger laughter. And lastly, dark humour can help to challenge societal norms, expose injustice and hypocrisy, and provide a tool for social commentary and critique without direct confrontation. There's a bit of a trope about clowns, or comedians more broadly, being sad, troubled people underneath the mask. And this is actually an enduring motif in culture known as pagliacci syndrome, which can be traced back to the 17th century. The story goes like this. A man goes to see the doctor. He says he's depressed, that life seems harsh and cruel. He says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. The doctor replies, "Treatment is simple. The great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go and see him. That should pick you up." The man bursts into tears and says, "But doctor, I am Pagliacci." The story of the clown and the doctor is an old one with various iterations. Before it was Pagliacci, it was Carlini or Grimaldi. More recently, the joke was featured in DC Comics' 1986 graphic novel Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, and revisited in the Watchmen movie from 2009. But in 2014, Pagliacci made headlines when numerous entertainers tweeted the story in response to Robin Williams' passing. Robin Williams' life and death seems to epitomize the sad clown's story, the story of a beloved comedian and award-winning actor who behind the scenes suffered with mental illness and drug addiction. And something in the joke clearly speaks to people, not just because it's clever, but because it manages to encapsulate how many of us feel when facing existential anxiety. Even in the foreword of Black Humour 1965, the editor wrote this about black humorists. "I doubt that the writers here are bluff and hearty joke tellers who spend a lot of time at discotheques. Invite them all to a party and you would probably find a great deal of brooding and sulking. At no time during the evening would they circle around the piano to sing hit tunes from Jerome Kern musicals. I think there would be many furtive glances about the room, each writer eyeing his neighbour suspiciously. We've probably all met a person who is too self-deprecating, someone with a personality comprised of 70% sarcasm and 30% sadness. Self-deprecation is a useful technique in comedy that allows the comedian to get around the problem of being offensive, because instead of making fun of others, you're making fun of part of yourself. And even more so now, with social and political views continuing to evolve, we expect comedians to stay in their lane. That is, to only poke fun at topics that you yourself are a part of. This helps to reduce the potential offensiveness of the joke, but only does so through the deprecation of the comedian. And a lot of people who end up in comedy are outsider types, who learned early on that they could get attention by making others laugh. Many successful comedians are open about their troubled childhoods and struggles with addiction and mental illness. But likewise, we often hear from comedians who have found a way to use their adversities and insecurities as fuel for their creative work, thereby turning weaknesses into strength. But does this mean that those with a dark sense of humor are all sad clowns? Maybe? Just like dark humor can be an opportunity for coping with and processing difficult emotions, it can also go the other way and become a crutch. Maybe you use it to deflect, putting a shield between yourself and others so that you never have to get so close to them that you get hurt. Or maybe you just haven't been able to afford therapy yet and this shield thing seems to be working all right for you so far. I don't know. I think it's incredibly individual. All I know for myself is that my ability to make jokes that people actually find funny and not just sad or mean got a whole lot better when I wasn't depressed. But don't get too sad about all of that, because the great Tina Fey once said, "You can tell how smart people are by what they laugh at." And the relationship between dark comedy and intelligence is backed by research. A study published in the Journal of Cognitive Processing found that people with a dark sense of humor often had higher levels of intelligence than those who don't. This includes both IQ, like how well you understand concepts and solve problems, as well as EQ, how well you can recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. Participants in the study who showed the highest levels with respect to Black humor preference and comprehension show high levels with respect to intelligence, have higher education levels, and show the lowest values regarding mood disturbance and aggression. So despite the disturbing themes in dark humor, those who appreciate it the most appear to have less aggressive tendencies and are better at regulating their own emotions than those who don't. So good job, you. The year is 1990. Over 2 consecutive nights, 38,000 people gathered in Madison Square Gardens, New York, anxiously awaiting the decade's most controversial performer and the first comedian to ever sell out this prestigious venue, Andrew Dice Clay. At the time, the Dice Man was known for his explicit and offensive style of comedy and ridiculous leather jackets.
If you don't know the language, get the fuck out of the country!
As you'd expect, he really got people talking. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the Dice Man amassed a large, dedicated following who embraced his politically incorrect humor. But for every fan, there's an outspoken critic. Feminist groups and advocates for women's rights called his performances degrading, offensive, and emblematic of outdated and harmful comedic styles. Clay's macho, arrogant New Yorker personality enabled a quick rise to fame, followed by an even sharper decline, getting banned from MTV and Saturday Night Live.
Catch me early evenings, you fucking chink bastard! You slanty-eyed cocksucker, what you are!
But Clay insists that the Dice Man was just an onstage persona, developed to entertain.
I think the media's made too much out of me telling dirty jokes. You know, I created a character that obviously a lot of people like. I mean, I fill every arena in the country. And the thing is, the media, instead of seeing the joke, they like say it's horrible, you know, but yet 20,000 people in an arena laugh like crazy.
This last section is dedicated to the debate around comedy and insensitivity. The line in comedy is the forever shifting boundary between what is considered humor and what is deemed offensive. The line is not fixed and often is only discussed when it's crossed by some high-profile figure. Events like in 2018 when Dave Chappelle got in hot water for making jokes featuring controversial topics like Me Too and trans people. And plenty of other famous comedians like Jimmy Carr, Ricky Gervais, and Michelle Wolf have all experienced backlash for their jokes in recent years. But what unspoken rules are being broken here? How do we know when the line has been crossed? Who decides what topics or jokes cross this line? And what is the appropriate punishment? When it comes to the unspoken rules, the concept of deviance, a sub-branch of sociology, might have some answers. The study of deviance is primarily concerned with understanding behaviors, beliefs, and actions that are considered abnormal, unacceptable, or divergent from social norms within a particular society or group. Paraphrasing from Deviance, Conformity, and Control by Sharon Roach and Liu, deviance is an elusive concept. There is an infinite amount of behaviors that could be considered deviant, including drugs, theft, abortion, illness, being queer, women employed as truck drivers, or men employed as ballet dancers. Basically, what is considered deviant is wildly variable, and the conceptions of deviance change over time and across cultures. Erikson writes, "Every human community has its own special set of boundaries, its own unique identity, and so we must presume that every community also has its own characteristic styles of deviant behavior. So we all consider different things deviant. What I might consider inappropriate for a comedian to talk about could be completely different for you. Likewise, when a comedian makes a joke about something traditionally seen as taboo or deviant, like gay people, it opens up a whole nother can of worms on the other side when the audience interprets that through their own history and experience. But ultimately, every day we hear opinions that other people make that we don't share ourselves, most of which we probably ignore and get past pretty quickly. So in order to get your phone out, open Twitter, and rage tweet the Oscars about Kevin Hart, you got to be pretty motivated. We know when the proverbial line has been crossed, at least for some individuals, when enough people are mad about it to take action. And now with social media, people can take action whenever they like. But who are these people who decide what topics or jokes cross this line and are therefore deserving of punishment? In many cases, those who speak openly about offensive jokes or controversial comedians are people who have a soft spot for these issues or don't like being the butt of the joke. Like the guy who attacked Dave Chappelle on stage at the Netflix is a Joke festival, later stating in interviews that he was upset by Chappelle's jokes about homelessness and the LGBTQ+ community, topics that he felt personally connected to. So what about punishment? Does it fit the crime? Well, as most things considered in the court of public approval, it's neither fair or well-informed. Often we like to pick sides, and most of the time we're too busy to even read the article for the full story, so we pick sides very quickly. Often our decision is based on whether or not the comedian shares the values of the social group that we belong to. If I were to walk into some social circles and say, I still watch Louis C.K. stand up, the response from the room might have me feeling about as uncomfortable as that woman who had to have a phone conversation with him while he jerked off. Gross. Once a comedian is classified as a racist, a transphobe, or a Trump supporter, it's not long before the public takes sides, placing the comedian into either the us or them category, and the conversation is now over. Personally, I believe in redemption, not just because I think it's the right thing to do, but because the more you try to limit and stigmatize people, the more they double down. Quote, rule-breaking activity increases in response to sanctions and stigmatization, which results ultimately in the actor's acceptance of a deviant social status and conformity within the associated social expectations. Once defined as deviant, the person may be rewarded for playing the deviant role and punished or discredited for conforming to social norms. A classic example is Lenny Bruce, often considered the archetype of the controversial comedian. Lenny Bruce was renowned for his open, critical style of comedy that tackled taboo subjects such as politics, religion, and sex. His performances led to several arrests for obscenity in the 1960s, making him a martyr in the eyes of many for free speech and comedic expression. Because you can't tell someone who is vocal about free speech to shut up unless you want to prove their point for them. It's only in some cases where comedians have been able to come back from this bad boy reputation, usually with a lucrative kids movie franchise deal or an award-winning performance in a serious role. And with all this considered, I think I see it from both directions. There's the right to free speech from the artist, and there's the right to free speech from the audience who hates them. Casey Michael, novelist and writer, says if artists are considered as comedians, then artworks will be judged by results, successful or otherwise, rather than intent. As long as the jester produces a laugh, he is allowed to keep his head. In other words, if the audience laughs, it's all gravy. From the audience's perspective, it's sometimes hard to distinguish the difference between the comedian and the character. In a dark comedy film like Death at a Funeral, it contains all the taboos and controversy that we generally find uncomfortable, but because of the storytelling, relatability, and absurdity, our expectations as an audience are very different than what we might expect from a stand-up comedian. Stand-up comedy seems to have a different set of rules. There's no deferred responsibility like a movie has with directors, producers, writers, and actors. And there's usually not multiple characters with different perspectives for us to relate to. It's just one person performing potentially just one character with jokes that they wrote themselves. It's harder to see a comedian up there alone and not put the full weight of responsibility on their shoulders. And now at this point, I was going to talk about Dave Chappelle because he's received a lot of flack, particularly for his jokes referencing trans people. I watched every Netflix special since 2017, paying pretty close attention to the jokes that were the most controversial. And I actually really struggled to work out what parts were worth canceling him over. I'm not an expert on his work, but now I've watched several hours worth of his stand-up, and you know what? I really like him. I think he's more sensitive and intelligent than some give him credit for.
Yeah, man. Well, you ladies are right. To be honest with you, your lives look terrifying to me. They do, man. I know nothing about being a woman, but I know fear. Yo, I used to live in New York when I was 17, and I couldn't even pay my bills. You know what I did to make money? I used to do shows for drug dealers that wanted to clean their money up. One time I did a real good set, and these motherfuckers called me in the back room. They gave me $25,000 in cash. I was probably 18, 19 years old. I was scared. I thanked them profusely. I put that money in my backpack. I jumped on the subway and started heading towards Brooklyn at 1 o'clock in the morning. Never been that terrified in my life. Because I never in my life had something that somebody else would want. I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, if motherfuckers knew how much money I had in this backpack, they'd kill me for it. Then I thought, holy shit. What if I had a pussy on me all the time? That's what women are dealing with.
But if, by the way, you have any information or clips that you think would sway my opinion, I'm more than open to hearing you out. But in terms of the allegations of him being transphobic or anti-women, I wonder if those people have truly taken the time to watch all his stuff. I doubt it, honestly, because why would you sit through 8+ hours of stand-up comedy by a guy that you don't like? That would be ridiculous. Anyway, I think a successful dark joke needs to meet a few requirements. When the motivation behind the joke is to get a laugh by any means possible, there will always be those edgelords who think that making light of something taboo is enough. And you might get a few cheap laughs because the topic is not something people generally joke about. But the joke isn't clever, and no one comes away having learnt anything new. These types of jokes usually rely on surprise twists, taboo subject matter, and play on the insider-outsider dynamic, sometimes punching down or at least punching outside of their audience's group. Some examples might include comedian Anthony Jeselnik or YouTuber channels like this one.
My ex-girlfriend, so I took her wheelchair. Guess who came crawling back? That bitch.
Why are women's feet so small?
Why?
So they can stand closer to the sink.
An alternative is when the motivation behind the joke is to call attention to something dark or morbid but true, thereby building tension.
Someone said that dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima is an example of science going wrong.
Having a twist that generates further thought in the audience's minds and which provides laughter in the form of relief.
Whereas I think it worked a treat, didn't it?
Thereby creating new insights and perspectives about a subject.
I assume that's what they wanted to happen, wasn't it? The military did that, governments, us, we're in charge.
This is the type of dark joke that is the hardest to pull off. And it's why I'm still a fan of Ricky Gervais. At the end of the day, when it's a comedian's job to say outrageous, risky things on stage, those Netflix specials will forever be examples of where we were at in this particular social, cultural, and political moment. And whether or not you agree with the jokes or care for the comedians, the boundaries that they push in their work will always be something worth taking a step back from and considering what it's telling us about ourselves. Dark comedians say what we can't. And I think that's worth preserving. Okay, and that's all I've got for you today. As always, if you want to continue the discussion in the comments with me, my question for you today is, where do you think you get your sense of humor from? And of course, thank you to my 13 Patreons. You guys keep this channel going. See you next time.